Hey, something tells me that in this room, if you call yourself a Christian, that there has been this moment, or maybe you're having this moment right now, or maybe this is just like a quiet voice inside of you that you haven't really identified until I'm about to talk about it. Maybe the Lord will be like, hey, that's actually you, where you have been like, okay, wait a minute. Is this all there really is? Is this really all the Christian life is? Is this really it? Like maybe you had this experience of like immense joy where Jesus saved you and suddenly like your life was changed and you began to see things transform and that this purpose that you had never experienced before fell onto your chest and suddenly you were like, oh my gosh, like I'm loved by God and I get to be at work in the world with him. How wonderful, how marvelous this is. And maybe since that moment you've grown dry. Maybe since that moment, you've actually grown dissatisfied. There's this kind of longing in your heart. There's this low level like frustration because you can't seem to grip onto what once was. Or maybe you never gripped onto that. Maybe you stepped into life with Jesus and you're like, hey, I've actually never experienced this at all. For some of you, it feels like if you did experience it at one point, it's like you had this, like your Christian life was kind of like an old muscle car and it had some power and you'd be able to floor it and man, that thing would go. And now you feel like the engine of the old muscle car doesn't work and you're not feeling the torque you once did and you're actually outside of the car. You're not even in the driver's seat and you're pushing the car down the road and you feel powerless. Like you see things in the Bible and you hear stories from other people about how God has moved and how God is moving. But for you, you're like, wait a minute, I thought I would experience more of God in my life. I thought like I would experience his presence. I thought he would do things like I hear him doing for other people for me. Maybe you're running the Christian plays, you're going to church, you're opening up your Bible, you're trying to pray, but like none of those things are actually clicking. And you have little to no encounters of the living God in your life. If you are in a moment right now where like, I just identified something or where that has been identified in you, let me tell you what you're experiencing. You're experiencing an agony of the absence of God in your life. You're experiencing an inward agony where your very created design is crying out to be connected with its creator, where your soul is languishing and your soul wants more. And the truth is, God never hardens himself towards you. So if there's an absence of God in your life, where does the true problem lie if it can't lie with him? But what's interesting, and even if you're acknowledging this in this moment, when we begin to acknowledge the absence of God in our lives, there's this interesting kind of paradoxical thing that happens. When we acknowledge the agony of absence, it's actually a sign of his presence. Like when we acknowledge the fact that, wait a minute, like I'm not connected to the Lord. I'm not experiencing the living God. Like things, like for some reason I feel like I try to open this Bible and nothing is, like I'm hammering. I'm trying to understand. I'm trying to read it, but like I feel so disconnected. I'm trying to pray. I come to church and I dread going to church. You're trying to like run these plays and do these things, but nothing is jump-starting your life and your connectivity to the Lord. When you begin to acknowledge God's absence in your life, it's actually a sign of his presence because it points you to the fact that God is in hot pursuit of you, trying to wake you up. He's in hot pursuit of you, drawing you in. He's in hot pursuit of you, creating this spirit-wrought, like something only God could do, desire for renewal. This spirit-wrought desire for the nearness of God. And if you're in this room and you're hungry for renewal, you're hungry for God's presence, you're hungry for more, the book of Hosea is great for you. That's where we're going to be. And let me just say, the reason you're hungry, even if you just identified, wait a minute, that low level of frustration that I feel all the time, like that's God pursuing me? Yes. Like you're hungry because God is after you and he loves you with an unfailing, steadfast love that's beyond your comprehension of love in the first place. So if you're hungry for renewal, Hosea is a good place to start. Now Hosea, he's a minor prophet in the Bible. Let me give you a little bit of background. He's a prophet in the northern kingdom. So Israel split into two. The northern kingdom stayed Israel. Hosea calls it a few different names, Ephraim, Jacob. And then there's the southern kingdom, which is Judah. They split up, and the northern kingdom was prospering. They were doing very well. They had a good economic situation. They were aligning themselves politically with like a couple powerhouses, Egypt and Assyria. And they were just like doing really well. But the reality is that in the midst of them doing really well, they were in a spiritual spiral. And Hosea, a prophet of God, who is one who speaks on behalf of God, goes to the people of the northern kingdom, goes to the people of Israel, and is trying to wake them up, warning them, hey, you might see all the prosperity around you, but you are on a damning trajectory. Because both your king, Jeroboam II, you don't need to remember any of these details. I just want to kind of frame it up for you. Both your king, Jeroboam II, and your hearts are slowly declining, slowly getting further and further from me. And what's so interesting is Hosea opens up chapters 1 through 3 telling a story that Hosea actually experienced where God says this. Here's this for a shocker. Hey, Hosea, go marry a prostitute. Like the words in our English Standard Version say, go find yourself a wife of whoredom. This is real. So he goes. He obeys the Lord. He marries this woman named Gomer. Not a great name for a woman, all right? But here we are, okay? He marries this woman named Gomer. And they begin their life together. He is obedient to what God had asked him to do. And what does Gomer do? She does exactly what God said she would do and what Hosea anticipated her to do. She begins to sleep around. She begins to not be faithful to him. Hosea and Gomer have one child together, and Gomer's pretty sure that that's his. They have a couple more, and he's not sure whether they are his or not. She gives herself to other men relentlessly. Things are messy. Things are really messy. Kids are caught up in it, and Hosea feels anguished, frustrated, and Hosea's urgency is to go after her. But Hosea is also battling other things, like, does she even deserve that? But God's command then follows, hey, she has made a mess of your marriage covenant. She has betrayed you. She's been unfaithful. But now I want you to go. I want you to find Gomer, and I want you to restore your relationship with her. I want you to pay off her debts because Gomer has gotten herself into some situations where she now owes people money. She owes men money probably that she was actually that were pimping her out. I want you to go. I want you to pay her debts, even in the midst of betraying you. And I want you to pledge your love to her. I want you to renew the marriage covenant that you had with her. And Hosea, this thing that God invites him into, this actually serves as a picture. It's a symbol. A marriage that was broken and is now repaired is actually a symbol of God's relationship with Israel, showing that God is not Gomer. God is Hosea, the faithful husband, going after his people, Israel, despite their unfaithfulness. God has proven his faithfulness time and time and time again. He has rescued his people out of slavery. He brought them into covenant. He actually entered into a covenant, a promise, a relationship with the people of Israel at Mount Sinai. And then he brought them in that covenant into the promised land where he gave them abundance. But what do they do in the promised land? Despite the covenant, despite even warnings to not do this, they turn their back on God and they dedicate the new land that God had promised them and given them, one that was fruitful and amazing. They give that land over to idols, to false gods, and they turn their back on him. Like God could have turned his back on Israel time and time again, all throughout the Old Testament. But what does he do? Instead of wiping them out, he renews his covenant with them. He renews his relationship with them. You see, Israel in the book of Hosea has again and again rebelled against God, has again and again broken their covenant with God. And Hosea is shouting warnings to them that, hey, God's going to bring serious consequences to you, because like God's consequences are an effort to wake his people up. He's like, hey, the way you're living on your own, the way you're living your life, the way that you think is best is actually going to hurt you more than help you. So I'm going to wake you up so you can get pointed in the right direction. And that right direction is in relationship with me, is following the ways that I have given you to live. So although Israel has rebelled against God and broken covenant with him time and time again, God's love and mercy are more powerful than Israel's stupidity and Israel's unfaithfulness. In fact, despite the betrayal of Israel, hey, in our new church, we're going to get a new podium because this thing falls and I want to throw it, okay? So just bear with me. I'm working through some stuff as I preach up here as a very imperfect man. Despite Israel's betrayal, here's what happens. Here's what is said in Hosea 2, 19 through 20. And this is a picture of God running after the people that have betrayed him. And I will betroth you to me forever. I will betroth you to me in righteousness and in justice, in steadfast love and in mercy. I will betroth you to me in faithfulness, and you shall know the Lord. The Lord is saying, hey, Israel, despite your idiocy, I'm going to run after you again and again and again, and I'm going to renew that covenant. Betrothal is like an engagement term. Like he's like, I'm going to bring us together and formalize our union once again, and you will, he says, know the Lord. He's like, we will know each other again, and there will be intimacy again, and you will realize that this life is the life that you've been longing for and were meant to live and never stop living. The rest of the book of Hosea actually spells out the unfaithfulness of Israel. It does it again and again and again in some pretty like unconventional ways. But alongside of the unfaithfulness of Israel, God's pursuit of Israel is evident again and again and again. So our main text is actually Hosea chapter 10, verse 1 through 12. Let me read that to us. And then we're gonna sort of blow through the first 11 verses. I want to frame it up for you, but then I want us to land in 12 and really do some work together. Chapter 10, verse 1, Israel is a luxuriant vine that yields its fruit. The more his fruit increased, the more altars he built. As his country improved, he improved his altars. Their heart is false. Now they must bear their guilt. The Lord will break down their altars and destroy their pillars. For now they will say, we have no king, for we do not fear the Lord. And a king, what could he do for us? They utter mere words. With empty oaths they make covenants. So judgment springs up like poisonous weeds in the furrows of the field. The inhabitants of Samaria tremble for the calf of Beth-aven. Its people mourn for it, and so do its idolatrous priests, those who rejoiced over it and over its glory, for it has departed from them. The thing itself shall be carried to Assyria as tribute to the great king. Ephraim shall be put to shame, and Israel shall be ashamed of his idol. Samaria's king shall perish like a twig on the face of the waters. The high places of Avon, the sin of Israel, shall be destroyed. Thorn and thistle shall grow up on their altars, and they shall say to the mountains, cover us, and to the hills, fall on us. From the days of Gibeah you have sinned, O Israel. There they have continued. Shall not the war against the unjust overtake them in Gibeah? When I please, I will discipline them, and nations shall be gathered against them when they are bound up for their double iniquity. Ephraim was a trained calf that loved to thresh, and I spared her fair neck, but I will put Ephraim to the yoke. Judah must plow, Judah must harrow for himself. Sow for yourselves righteousness. Reap steadfast love. Break up your fallow ground, for it is time to seek the Lord, that he may come and rain righteousness upon you. We find ourselves here in good times for the people of God. Things were good. They're described as a luxurious or a luxuriant vine, which is like lush. A vine that has profuse growth. They're experiencing wealth. They're experiencing prosperity as a people. But it's in the midst of good times that their hearts begin to wander. Their hearts begin to slowly get away from God, who he is, and his plan for them. The truth is, and maybe this is a word for you in this room, riches, a lot of money in our pocket, it actually, that promises a lot, but it often doesn't deliver if that's all we have. And Jesus warns us in Matthew 13 that riches actually, there's nothing wrong with having a lot of money in your pocket. There's nothing wrong with having a good bank account that is stocked up. There's nothing wrong with any of that. There's actually a lot of wisdom in that, especially if you're living a generous life. That's fine. But what can happen if we don't pay attention is our hearts can begin to wander. And Jesus warns in Matthew 13 that riches can begin to choke out the truth. This is what Israel's experiencing. They're experiencing a really good gift that God has given them that is now becoming the main thing instead of just something that the main thing has given them to bless them. Good things can block out God and can be misapplied. And the way that they misapply their prosperity is they begin to create all this paraphernalia for the false god named Baal. And they disguise it as the Christian God, the Hebrew God, Yahweh. They begin to turn their backs on the God who blessed them and begin to go kind of find other things that seemingly would satisfy them more. Is this not a picture of our lives so often? God will be really good to us, and as quick as he is good to us, we will turn and we will be like, oh, now there's this other thing that's actually intriguing me more. Or we'll turn and we'll be like, oh, wait a minute. You're a couple days down the road and you'll look back and you'll be like, I actually did that. That wasn't God's faithfulness to me. Moses warns the Israelites about this in Deuteronomy chapter 8. He says, hey, watch out, because Yahweh is going to bring you into the promised land, and you are going to have this dangerous trap that's going to be right in front of you your entire time there. And that trap is that you could possibly fall into is that you could look back and forget what God has done and begin to make yourself believe that you're the one who did it. That's what Israel's facing. They're starting to believe that all the prosperity, all the goodness that they're reaping in their lives is because of their own hands, their own work, their own industry. But it's certainly not the case. It's because of God's kindness. And because of that, we see in verse 2, we see this phrase that's important for us to realize what this means. Their heart is false. Another word for false here could be divided. They have divided hearts where they kind of know the God of Israel, but they're pursuing other things. They drift. And in the same way that an unfaithful spouse will say that they love their partner, all the while living a lie, is the same way Israel's heart was towards God. And the fruit of that divided heart is really three primary things, and there's a bunch of things that flow from this, but I'm going to give you three for the sake of time. The fruit of that divided heart is that they forget about their God. They begin to know his name, but not his character. They begin to know his name, but not his love. They begin to know his name, but not his ways. They begin to know his name, but they do not have relationship with him. They begin to know his name. They know about him, but they don't actually know him. Because life is so good around them that they're missing him. Man, I'll be honest with you, that's one of the heaviest things that has sat on me all week long. I think for a lot of us in this room, life is so comfortable. The reason we have this underlying angst, frustration inside of us is because life is good for you. You don't need God. You might not say that out loud, but the way you live your life is an actual portrayal of the fact that you think in your heart you do not need the living God. You know his name, but you do not know him. You know his name, but you do not know his heart. So that's one fruit of their divided hearts. The second fruit is they begin to ignore his ways. They forget things like the 10 commandments, and then they show up to temples and make sacrifices to God. They do not live for God outside of the temples, but they show up to make sacrifices to God, to kind of run through these religious motions with no change in their hearts. They ignore his ways, and the third thing is they begin to trust in other things outside of him, particularly political allies, particularly godless Assyria, particularly godless Egypt. They begin to rely on them, and they think that it's political prowess that will get them what they need, which is interesting because Hosea is like, warning, warning, and they don't even listen to him, and Assyria is the ones that come and absolutely blow them up shortly thereafter, very shortly after Hosea's life and ministry. So Hosea is warning the people. He's warning them. He's like, hey, guys, you're experiencing prosperity, but your hearts are divided. You're quickly forgetting the goodness of God. Do not do that because it's a slippery slope. And what you rejoice over now, all of this prosperity, all these good things that God has given you, you're missing the actual script. And if you keep missing it, there's going to be a day of reckoning that will come. There's going to be a time of, like if you think now is rejoicing, there's going to be a time of mourning that is coming. You will face grave sorrow. And the glory that you once experienced among you, the very glory of God, is going to depart from you. Hosea begins to just illustrate how Israel, you're like a field. You're like a field and you're allowing thorns and thistles to grow up. And you, as that field, you're no longer productive. You're no longer producing fruit if you continue in this way. We see in verse, let me see, I didn't have this down here. We see in verse 10, if you continue in this way, this is what Hosea says, on behalf of God, when I please, I will discipline them. And nations shall be gathered against them, and they will be bound up for their double iniquity. There will be a day where God has had enough, and he needs to actually do the thing. Like a parent, like sometimes as a parent, like when your kids like aren't listening, you kind of like try to, okay, honey, like you got to just like, this is what you need to do. Like, hey, we need to correct that. Hey, honey, like, and then there's a moment where you got to be like, yo, and bring the hammer down. There's a moment where you got to like wake them up. There's a moment where you got to sit down, family meeting style. There's a moment where you got to like actually like, hey, we're taking a walk. Let's go. We need to talk about life. God in his kindness is always wooing us back in. And then in his kindness, at times, he needs to kind of like take us out at the feet and drop us to wake us up and show us, hey, you're missing the script. And you're heading towards eternal devastation if you do not change your ways. So that's what Hosea is barking. He's warning. There's going to be a time where discipline comes. But here is what's so beautiful about this part of Hosea. Verse 12. Verse 12. Hosea says, sow for yourselves righteousness. Reap steadfast love. Break up your fallow ground, for it is time to seek the Lord. Why? So that he may come and rain righteousness upon you. God, in the midst of their silliness, is pursuing them. And he's calling them into renewal. Like just like Hosea said, he's like, hey, you're like a field that's not producing anything. You were once fruitful. You're like we saw in verse 1, a luxuriant vine. But now this land has become fallow, unproductive. Nothing has happened. And in this verse, God is actually inviting the people of Israel back into being fruitful. He's inviting the people of Israel back into their like created purpose. Fields weren't meant to sit fallow. But he's like, hey, come back in and grow and produce and live out the very reason that you have been created. Let's think about this in the terms of a farmer. If a farmer has 100 acres of farm and all of those acres are good soil and they could yield fruit, and at that farmer, over the process of 10 years, every year he loses 10% of his laborers. And then over the process of 9 years, suddenly he's lost 90% of his laborers. And then he has these laborers that are trying to till up and sow into 10% of that field that is capable of 100% fruitfulness. This is where Israel is. Israel has slowly lost acreage and forgotten God, and because of that, they are bearing no fruit. My friends, in this room, I want to be real practical here because you know the story of Israel. I've just told you this, at least in this moment, you know this story. But I want to turn this in for our own hearts. Like Israel, what areas of your life have you experienced spiritual atrophy? In what areas of your life are what areas of your heart are fallow and not producing a thing? You know, it's interesting. It's often a slow fade. It's not often a moment, but for those of you who have walked with God or for those of you who have never walked with God, it's oftentimes a slow fade to just harden yourself to God's goodness in your life. In the allegorical work of C.S. Lewis, in the Screwtape Letters, he has this he calls it the chief devil, named Screwtape, who is training this underling named Wormwood. And he's kind of training him up in how to deceive people, how to throw them off the scent of God, how to push them out of the light and into the darkness. And this is what Screwtape says to Wormwood. He says, hey, it does not matter how small the sins are provided, that their cumulative effect is to edge the man away from the light and out into the nothing. Murder is no better than cards if cards do the trick. Indeed, the safest road to hell is the gradual one, the gentle slope, the soft underfoot, without sudden turnings, without milestones, without signposts. Listen, my friends. The great scheme of the enemies of God, the great scheme of the evil one of this universe is to edge you slowly but surely out of devotion and for you to live your life like every other American around you. This is what's happened to Israel. They've been edged out of devotion and they're beginning to just live their lives the way that they think would be best for them. The invitation of verse 12 is this beautiful invitation to be hey, wake up and find renewal because this is actually what you long for. Verse 12 has 3 actions in it, and I'm going to talk about them. Sow for yourself righteousness, reap steadfast love, reap where it's an action you kind of reap, but it's given to you, so we're not going to talk about that one as much. We will throughout, okay? Sow for yourself righteousness, reap steadfast love, break up your fallow ground, for it is time to seek the Lord that he may come and rain righteousness upon you. This verse is filled with the sovereignty of God. God's actually saying, hey, this is what you need to do, and this is what I'm going to do in response to that. He doesn't give a time frame. We don't tell God what to do and when to do it, right? Because we're not God. But he does tell us what to do. God is seeking after his people, and we're getting a picture of what God is actually seeking after. We know the God of the Bible is a seeking God. He's a generous God. He's a kind God. But what is he seeking after? He's seeking after those who will sow righteousness, who will reap steadfast love, who will break up the fallow ground in their heart, and who will seek him. So we have some human responsibility, albeit empowered by the Spirit of God, albeit God is going to direct us to the water, but we have some human responsibility where he's hey, pay attention to this and begin to do it. So he says, sow for yourselves righteousness. Now listen, Israel has sown seeds of sin. They have sown a life that is opposed to the living God, and they're reaping judgment. But how does one sow righteousness into their lives? Well, it's pretty basic. You begin to live the way that God tells you to live, because it actually produces things. Like, I don't want us to ever to fall into the trap. Like, I want us to understand how gracious God is, how merciful God is, but I do not want us to fall into this sloppy grace trap that says we actually don't need to obey the Lord and live for the Lord and actually do what he said. If you're not experiencing the living God in your life, you could start by actually doing what he said, because he's actually wants to transform your life, and he isn't just like kicking you out the house, telling you to go live that way. He will be with you in the places he's invited you into and empower that type of obedience. So to sow righteousness is to embrace the ways of God. Like, how do you live your life? We all sow into our lives different things. Everything you do is sowing something into your life. What do you see that you're sowing into your life? And especially, here's a good question, like, what is that producing? Because here's what's true. This might sound oversimplified, but like, I want you to hear it. If you sow unforgiveness into your life, you're going to reap bitterness. If you sow greed into your life, you're going to reap discontent. If you sow dishonor into your life, you're going to reap division. If you sow pride into your life, you're going to reap arrogance. If you just sow entertainment and hobbies in your life over and over and over again, you're going to reap exhaustion and consumerism. If you sow addiction into your life, you're going to reap spiritual and physical deterioration. You sow worry, you're going to reap anxiety. You sow envy, you're going to reap insecurity. You sow dishonesty, you're going to reap no credibility. If you neglect to pray, you're going to reap emptiness and lack of intimacy with God. If you sow neglect of the love of God into your life, you're going to reap loving worldly things and worldly pleasure. If you neglect the Bible, you're going to sow not knowing God. If you sow like having relationships that you know aren't best for you with people who don't have your best interest in mind, you're going to reap being just like them. Listen, if you're dissatisfied with your life and if you feel disconnected with God, change your seed for a different harvest. I'm not preaching some like, if you just change the seed in your life, you're going to end up like being healthy, wealthy, and prosperous in all things in your life. This is a matter of the heart. Like, what if we were to sow repentance into our lives and watch, like, if you sow repentance into your life, I want you to see what harvest will come of that. Turning away from your ways into God's ways. What if you were to sow into your life a pursuit of God? You know what I would want you to do is to watch intimacy begin to grow with him. What if you were to sow faith in your life? I would want you to begin to watch God begin to use you. Listen, God's not a vending machine. I'm not just saying sow this and you're going to get this. I'm not saying like you tell God this and he's going to produce this. But I am saying that this example is actually found all over the scriptures. John 15, verse 5 says, I'm the vine and you are the branches. This is Jesus saying that he is the vine and that his people are the branches off of the vine. Whoever abides in me and I in him, he it is that bears much fruit, for apart from me, you can do nothing. We need to sow righteousness into our lives, meaning that is understanding where the gifts come from, who the gifts are for, where the power is. It comes from the vine. We are only branches. If you fall into this nuttiness of, I'm going to start sowing this in here so that like I can just like get all these selfish things that aren't actually like rooted in the fact that you are a branch off of the vine, then you've got the script wrong. But I wonder if you did an audit of your life and you asked what you sow into your life, what would come out of that? Because here's what we see here. We will reap when we sow righteousness. We will, what are we looking to reap? Mercy. Steadfast love, the love of God in return. Not just material things. We're looking to reap intimacy with the living God and relationship with the living God. God is not opposed to your effort in pursuing him, into sowing repentance into your life, into sowing pursuit of him into your life, into sowing faith in your life. He's not opposed to your effort. He is opposed to you trying to earn something on your own, because he's the one who gives good things to us. We don't bring that about on our own. So we need to sow. We need to break up fallow ground so that all these seeds that we're sowing will take root. Now, fallow ground, it's hard, it's stubborn. Just like Israel's heart here in this story. It's ground that doesn't want to be broken up. It requires attention. It requires some sweat to break up. Yeah, all of you in this room have broken up some type of fallow ground in your life. Like if anybody in here has like started going to CrossFit at like 5 a.m. in the morning, 3 times a week, like that's actually like fallow ground you're breaking up. If you try to diet, you're like, I'm not snacking at night. You're breaking up some fallow ground. Like if you've started any discipline, there's just things in your life, there's places that you haven't really ventured into and you're starting a new thing. That is you. It's a real practical example of you breaking up fallow ground. But the question here is, what fallow ground exists in your heart? If you feel disconnected from God, if you don't experience his love, if you can't read the scriptures and get anything from him, you actually just it's not because you don't understand and need to learn, but it's because you have trouble even just wanting to do it. Same with prayer. If you love your sin, then I would say yes, there's ground to be plowed in you. There's acreage in your heart that you're giving over to other things, and they might not even be bad things, but what it is doing is eliminating spiritual possibility in your life. Like this week, I asked God to point out fallow ground in my life, and I was like, Lord, please just make it really clear to me. And man, oh man, did he ever. It was like he had a machine gun that he ripped out and was just hitting me in the chest with it over and over again. Like it was just like one thing after another. The Lord was opening my eyes to areas of my life that I was saying, God, I don't want you here. And there's this spiritual reality, this holy discontentment that just came up in me. And I was just tired of settling for less. And all this fallow ground that the Lord was pointing out, I'm beginning to work on, but it's going to take some time. But in his kindness, he's like, hey, Rich, over here, look at this. The Lord's asking me for more of my dinner table with my family, that I would talk about him more. And I would open the scriptures with them so that they would get to read the words of life with me leading them. The Lord is actually inviting me into fallow ground in, these things have to do with time. It doesn't all have to do with time. But in my evenings, he's like, hey, the way you veg is you go watch some Netflix shows with your wife. There's nothing wrong with watching Netflix. There's nothing wrong with watching Survivor. If you're not watching Survivor, you should. It's great. But the Lord's just like, hey, this is an area in your life where you're actually giving acreage over to other things. What if you were to give that ground to me in hard and fast pursuit of me? My friends, I want us to get discontent today. I want us to ask the Lord, where are the areas of our hearts that are hardened, that are crusty, that need to be given over to him? Some helpful questions that I actually got from A.W. Tozer that are just used for self-discovery. And I want you to encourage you to even reject conventional answers that could maybe help you understand where the fallow ground is in your life. Here are some of them. What do you want most? What do you think about most? How do you use your money? What company do you keep? Who and what do you admire? What do you laugh at? What do you spend your leisure time doing? That last one got me. He's saying, sow righteousness, break up your fallow ground. And the central part of this verse is, it is time to seek the Lord. We break up fallow ground by seeking the Lord. Where else would we go? He wants to renew us. Like Hosea, he's running after you despite you. Do you realize Hosea is not just a picture of God with Israel, but he's a picture of Christ who bought his people back with his blood. Hosea went and he bought his wife back when she was already his. But he had to pay the price to release her from everything else. Jesus did the same for those of us in this room. If we're going to seek anything in this life, who else do we go to but him? The way that we sow good seed in our lives and don't get distracted by other things, the way that we break up fallow ground and don't give up like spiritual potential and acreage of our own hearts, is by knowing that what time it is time to seek the Lord. That is how we break up the fallow ground. That is how we sow good seed. And there's like two main ways I want to give you to seek the Lord. Like, let me ask you this question. What if we sought the Lord in prayer genuinely? Kind of like Jacob in the Old Testament, where Jacob is wrestling with God and he grabs him and he's like, I'm not letting go until you bless me. What if we had that type of fervent prayer? What if we sought the Lord so that he would actually like change us and show us our fallow ground and break up the unholy parts of us to make us more of who we were intended to be? And what if we also saw God in his word? What if we saw God in his word? Like 2 Corinthians, I think it's 4 or 5, says something along the lines of like, shine light on the knowledge of the glory of God. What if we went into the word and we're like, Lord, shine light on Jesus, shine light on God. Help me to see them more clearly. Help me to understand them. Help me to love them. Like, what if we just went after prayer and the word in ways where we're saying we're not going to give up until the Lord actually shows himself? Because when we seek, our soil is tilled. And when we seek, God has a promise in our seeking that he will, look at the end of verse 12, come and rain righteousness upon you. Like, we already know that when we begin to sow righteousness, we're going to reap his love. But when we begin to break up our fallow ground and we begin to seek him and we begin to just do the work that God's actually doing inside of us and embrace that work, God desires to move. Now, the timing of his movement is up to him, but the timing of our movement is actually intensified because of the way this verse ends. Because we see, sow for yourself righteousness, reap steadfast love, break up your fallow ground, for it is time to seek the Lord, that he may come and rain righteousness upon you. My friends, as God's people, there's an urgency to do this work, to get after it. And there's a joy in getting after it. This isn't a shame fest. This isn't like, man, I need to now rip out all the junk in my heart. No. God's inviting you to do this work so that you can receive love and that there's going to be a time where he is going to rain blessing upon you. And we don't want to miss when he decides to send the rain. We seek, how long? We seek until harvest comes, and that's God's timing. And we're promised in this verse that if we sow, we will reap the love of God. But we're also invited into doing the hard work of seeking him and grabbing onto like the hem of the garment of God and be like, God, I do not want to move until you renew me, until you transform me, until you do what only you could do in me. And do it significantly, Lord. There's a desert, it's the driest desert in the world, in Chile, called the Atacama Desert. And it's just, the whole thing is hardened, it's sandy, it's what a desert would look like. And underneath all of this dryness is actually wildflower seeds. But they never get any rain. It's the driest place on earth. And you look at it and you're like, oh man. And it's all just fallow ground. None of it's been worked. But there's every so often, and this isn't super often, there will be rains that come that will be 10 years worth of rain. And the very rain begins to actually till up the soil. And 10 years of rain means that like it falls and it falls heavy and it falls hard. And then suddenly days later, the super bloom comes and that dry desert place becomes the most colorful place on the planet. My friends, if I'm to like tie a bow on this, here's what I want us to hear. This is work that God is inviting you into, and he wants you to experience his love, and there's going to be times in your life where God just sends significant blessing that is called rain in here. And that blessing could look like a million different things. It could look like freedom from addiction. It could look like healing for your marriage. It could look like you start sharing the gospel with people and they actually start listening. It could look like a bunch of different things. Like there's so much internal work to be done. But here's what I also want us to realize, that like I don't just want me and a few of you to try to prepare for God to move. I want our whole church to prepare for God to move and to send rain. I want our whole church to seek God and to reap his steadfast love, not only because, man, that's all we really need, but because when God decides to move, I want us all to be part of it. I want none of us to miss it. When God decides to move, I don't want any of us left out. Like if you look at times where God has renewed individuals, but also entire cities in history, there have been people who have prepared for that. They have sowed righteousness. They have sought him. They've broken up fallow ground. And God just rains down blessing. And something called revival breaks out where God begins to just do a significant work in a specific period of time. But in those historic accounts of revival, guess what? There are many who did not prepare, who do not have anything to do with it. Whole churches. Because they weren't doing this type of work of growing to be more like God and doing this type of work of seeking him for who he is. I want us to be a people who seek. So let me ask you, I just want us to be a people who seek for the sake of seeking. I want us to be a people who seek for the sake of being caught up in the goodness of God. Where's your fallow ground? How will you sow righteousness into your life? How will you seek the Lord? Like those are questions I want you to answer before you leave. And as I invite the band back on stage, I actually want us to respond today by like reflecting. Where is our fallow ground? How will we sow righteousness into our life? How will we seek the Lord? Because God in his kindness is pursuing you again and again and again and again so that you may live the life that he has created you to live. We normally go into a time of communion, but we're just going to sing. I invite you to stay seated and reflect, or to stand up and worship. And we have people in the back who would love to pray with you. And so if you want to do some work with them, they would love to pray with you. They're there. Also, if you want to pray silently where you are, go ahead and dig on in, because the Lord, if the Lord does anything to you like he did to me over the past week, I said, hey, Lord, where's the fallow ground? And then it just, a list of things started showing. I think he's actually excited to meet with us in this space. And I think we will reap his steadfast love even in this moment as we seek him, because it's time to do so. So we're going to go through this next song, and I would just encourage you, seek the Lord. Seek the Lord. And then we'll do communion in just a few minutes.